The billionaire CEO who hadn't slept in 30 years finally fell asleep beside a poor girl. And when his shocked security team found him the next morning, he was holding her hand and whispering, "Don't let her leave." Ethan Blackwood had billions of dollars, a private penthouse, the best doctor's money could buy, and every luxury imaginable. But every night for 30 years, sleep had refused to come. He had become so desperate that doctors warned his exhausted body might eventually fail. Then, one night, everything changed. Emily Carter was just a poor waitress struggling to survive. She had no mansion, no expensive clothes, and no idea that the exhausted stranger sitting in her diner was one of the richest men in the city. But when Ethan looked into her eyes, something inside him finally became quiet. Hours later, in the back room of an old bakery, the impossible happened. The billionaire CEO closed his eyes and slept. Not for minutes. Not for an hour. He slept through the entire night. When his security team discovered him at sunrise, they couldn't believe what they were seeing. The most powerful man in the city peacefully asleep beside a poor girl who had nothing to give him. But why could Emily bring peace to a man who had spent 30 years fighting sleep? Why did Ethan become determined to keep her close after that unbelievable night? And what was the hidden connection between this poor girl and the tragedy that had stolen his sleep 3 decades earlier? 30 years earlier, before Ethan Blackwood became the billionaire CEO whose name appeared on skyscrapers and financial magazines, he had been a 22-year-old son desperately trying to prove himself to a demanding father. Now, at 52, his company was worth billions. He owned a private jet, several luxury homes, a fleet of cars, and an apartment overlooking half the city. Yet his bedroom contained something none of his wealth could buy: peace. At 2:17 every morning, Ethan's eyes opened. Always. Tonight was no different. The room was silent except for the soft electronic pulse of the medical monitor attached to his finger. Dr. Daniel Reeves stood beside the bed, studying the numbers with growing concern. "You need rest, Ethan." "I've heard that before." Daniel lowered his voice. "Your body is exhausted." Ethan looked toward the window. Thousands of lights glittered below him, but none could reach the darkness inside his chest. His gaze fell on an old photograph on the bedside table. Claire. His 16-year-old sister was smiling in it. For one painful second, Ethan was 22 again, watching Claire walk out of his bedroom with a handmade birthday card. "Don't sleep too long," she had teased. He had laughed. By morning, she was dead. Ethan had spent 3 decades believing that if he had stayed awake that night, he could have saved her. That belief had quietly become the prison of his life. His phone suddenly vibrated. Marcus Hale, his chief of security. Ethan answered. "Sir, we've found the offshore transfers." Ethan's expression hardened. "Who is behind them?" Marcus paused. "Someone close to the family." Ethan rose from the bed. But before he could ask another question, his eyes returned to Claire's photograph. He didn't know it yet, but the truth about her death, and the woman who would finally bring him peace, was already moving toward him. Ethan ended the call and walked toward the window. Below him, the city was still alive. Taxis moved through the streets like streams of light. Restaurants were closing. Office towers stood dark behind rows of glowing windows. Everyone else was preparing to sleep. Ethan was preparing for another night without it. Marcus entered the penthouse moments later. He was one of the few people Ethan trusted completely. For 20 years, he had protected Ethan through boardroom wars, kidnapping threats, hostile takeovers, and more than one attempt to sabotage Blackwood Global. Marcus placed a folder on the table. "We traced the transfers through 6 shell companies," he said. "The money eventually reached an account connected to Charles Bennett." Ethan's jaw tightened. Charles was not an outsider. He had been his father's attorney and had remained with the family after Richard Blackwood died. For 3 decades, Charles had advised Ethan, protected company secrets, and helped him turn a struggling family business into a global empire. "You're certain?" Ethan asked. "The evidence is strong." Ethan opened the folder. Numbers filled the pages. But beneath the financial records was something that bothered him more, a handwritten authorization bearing a signature he recognized. His own. "I didn't approve this." Marcus looked at him. "I know." Ethan stared at the document. Something was wrong. He had spent his adult life building systems because he didn't trust people. Every major transaction required multiple levels of verification. Someone had either forged his authorization or gained access to a system that should have been impossible to penetrate. "Don't confront Charles yet," Ethan said. Marcus nodded. "Find out who else is involved." Ethan walked back toward the photograph of Claire. 30 years ago, his father had taught him one lesson repeatedly: never let emotion interfere with business. But Claire's death had taught Ethan another lesson. Trust could kill you. Across the city, Emily Carter was finishing her shift at a small 24-hour diner. Unlike Ethan, she had no security team waiting outside, no private elevator, and no driver downstairs. She had $23 in her purse, a nearly empty phone battery, and a small key belonging to a bakery that wasn't technically her home. Emily wiped the last table and checked the clock. Her manager, Mrs. Collins, approached. "You're working tomorrow, too." "If you need me." "You've already worked 6 days." Emily smiled. "Bills don't take weekends off." Mrs. Collins studied her face. "You should rest." Emily's smile faded for half a second. Rest. The word carried a different meaning for her. She had learned not to complain after her father died. Thomas Carter had spent his life repairing buildings, fixing broken machinery, and helping people who couldn't afford expensive contractors. After his fatal workplace accident, Emily had left college to care for her mother. Then her mother died too. The savings disappeared into hospital bills. The apartment disappeared next. And eventually, Emily found herself sleeping in a bakery storeroom belonging to an elderly woman who had known her father. Emily never called herself homeless. She called it temporary. But temporary had lasted 8 months. She picked up her coat. Mrs. Collins watched her carefully. "Emily, that man at the corner table has been sitting there for 20 minutes. Emily turned. The stranger was dressed simply, but something about him was unmistakably expensive. A dark coat. A perfectly fitted shirt. A watch worth more than the diner. Yet his face looked exhausted. He wasn't scrolling through his phone. He wasn't eating. He was simply staring at the coffee in front of him. Emily walked over. "Sir." The man looked up. His eyes were red from exhaustion. "Yes. You've been sitting here for 20 minutes. I know. You haven't touched your coffee." "I don't drink coffee." Emily glanced at the untouched cup. "Then why did you order it?" The man looked almost amused. "I wasn't thinking." Emily pulled out the chair opposite him. "You look like you need sleep." Something changed in his expression. For most people, the subject would have been ordinary. For Ethan Blackwood, it was almost an accusation. "I don't sleep." Emily studied him. "Everybody sleeps." "Not me." She looked at him for a moment longer. Then she quietly said, "Neither do I." Ethan frowned. "How long?" Emily shrugged. "Long enough." Neither of them knew how much those 4 words would change their lives. Outside, Ethan's driver was waiting. Marcus was watching from across the street. But Ethan didn't leave. For the first time that night, he wasn't thinking about Charles Bennett, offshore accounts, Claire, or the endless machinery of his empire. He was simply looking at a woman who had almost nothing, and yet somehow seemed less afraid of life than he was. Emily stood. "Do you want something to eat?" "No." "Then what do you want?" Ethan opened his mouth. For once, the billionaire CEO had no answer. Emily waited. And somewhere beneath the exhaustion, beneath 30 years of fear and control, something inside Ethan began to loosen. Neither of them noticed the black SUV that had just stopped across the street. Marcus stepped out. He had finally recognized the man sitting inside the diner. But he wasn't alone. Someone else was watching Emily. And unlike Marcus, that person wasn't there to protect Ethan. Emily returned to the counter, but Ethan's eyes followed her. There was something unusual about her. She didn't know who he was. That alone made him curious. For 30 years, Ethan had rarely entered a room without someone recognizing him. Employees became nervous. Investors became careful. Strangers became flattering. Emily had done none of those things. She had looked at a tired man and seen only a tired man. Ethan picked up the untouched cup. "You said you don't sleep." Emily continued wiping the counter. "Not properly." "Why?" She paused. "My father used to say that some people stay awake because they're afraid of tomorrow." Ethan looked at her. "And you?" "My father died." The answer was simple, but something in her voice made it clear that the story was much larger. Thomas Carter had died 5 years earlier in a workplace accident. Emily had been 22. She still remembered the phone call. She had been sitting in a college lecture when an unknown number appeared on her screen. The caller had told her there had been an accident at a construction site. She remembered running to the hospital. She remembered her mother's trembling hands. She remembered the doctor lowering his eyes before speaking. Afterward, Emily had stopped making plans. College disappeared. Then the bills arrived. Her mother grew sick. Every dollar she earned went toward medicine, rent, and food. When Margaret finally died, Emily discovered that her father's old debts had swallowed almost everything he had left behind. The only thing she kept was his battered toolbox. It still contained the tools he had used for decades. One small wrench had his initials engraved on the handle. TC. Emily kept it because it reminded her that her father had believed broken things could be repaired. Even people. She looked back at Ethan. "And you?" she asked. "What keeps you awake?" Ethan stared through the window. "My sister died." Emily's expression softened. "I'm sorry." She was 16. He had expected questions. There were none. Emily simply placed a fresh glass of water in front of him. Ethan looked down. "You're not going to ask what happened?" "No." "Why?" "Because if you wanted me to know, you'd tell me." The answer unsettled him. People usually wanted something from him. Emily wanted nothing. A moment later, Ethan's phone rang. He ignored it. It rang again. "Marcus." Ethan answered. "What?" "We need to leave." "Why?" Marcus glanced toward the street. "We have a problem." Ethan's eyes narrowed. "What kind?" "Someone has been following you." Ethan stood immediately. Emily noticed the sudden change. "What happened?" "Nothing," Ethan said. But his voice had changed. He looked toward the window. A black sedan was parked across the street. Its engine was running. Then it moved. Emily watched it disappear. "Friend of yours?" "No." She studied him. "You should go." Ethan looked at her. "I don't want to." It was the first time, that night, he had said exactly what he felt. Emily blinked. Neither understood why. Outside, Marcus approached the diner. "Sir." Ethan stepped toward him. Then he stopped. He looked back at Emily. "What time do you finish?" "Now." "Where are you going?" "Home." Marcus glanced at the worn coat she was wearing. Ethan noticed. "You don't have a car." "No." "I'll take you." Emily immediately shook her head. No. Why? Because I don't know you. Ethan almost smiled. Fair enough. She gathered her things. Then Ethan noticed something fall from her bag. A small metal wrench. He picked it up. TC. Emily's face changed. My father's initials. Ethan stared at the letters. For reasons he couldn't explain, something about them felt familiar. Not personally. Historically. A name from an old company document. A name connected to the accident that had changed his family's life. But before he could ask, Emily took the wrench from his hand. Good night, Mr. Blackwood. Ethan froze. She had finally recognized him. Or so he thought. But Emily walked away without asking for an autograph, a photograph, or anything else. She simply left. Ethan watched her disappear through the door. Marcus stepped closer. Sir, we really need to go. Ethan didn't move. For 30 years, he had built walls around himself. Tonight, a poor waitress had walked through one without even trying. And neither of them knew that the name engraved on that tiny wrench would eventually reopen the darkest secret in the Blackwood family. Ethan remained outside the diner long after Emily disappeared around the corner. Marcus stood beside the black SUV, waiting. You said someone was following me, Ethan finally said. Yes. Who? We don't know yet. Ethan looked toward the street Emily had taken. Then find out. Marcus studied him, and the woman. Ethan's expression tightened. What about her? You've never done this. Done what? Stopped caring about a threat because someone caught your attention. Ethan gave him a cold look. I'm not interested in her. Marcus almost smiled. Of course. Ethan got into the SUV. But as they drove away, he looked through the rear window one last time. Emily was nowhere in sight. Across town, Emily walked through the quiet streets with her coat pulled tightly around her. She wasn't thinking about the billionaire. Not exactly. She was thinking about his eyes. There had been something familiar about his grief. She had seen that same emptiness in her mother during the months after her father's death. When Emily reached the bakery, she unlocked the side door and slipped inside. The building belonged to Mr. Alina Grant, an elderly woman whose husband had once owned the bakery with her. After Thomas Carter died, Alina had offered Emily the unused back room. It wasn't much. A narrow bed. A tiny heater. One wooden table. But Emily kept it spotless. She placed her father's toolbox beneath the bed and removed the little wrench she had shown Ethan. For a moment, she remembered her father. He was standing beside an old car in their driveway, wiping grease from his hands. Emily, he had said, machines usually tell you when something is wrong. She had laughed. What about people? He had smiled. People are harder. Then his expression had become serious. But remember this, if someone tells you something is impossible, look twice. The memory faded. Emily placed the wrench inside the toolbox. She didn't know why Ethan Blackwood had reacted to those initials. She didn't know that her father had once worked for Ethan's family. And she certainly didn't know that Thomas Carter had carried a secret to his grave. Meanwhile, Ethan returned to his penthouse. The city lights followed him through the glass walls. He removed his coat. Then stopped. His eyes went to the clock. 2:17. Again. He waited for the familiar panic. His chest tightened. His mind began replaying the past. Claire standing in his doorway. Her birthday card. The sound of his mother's scream. The crash. The funeral. 30 years of waking at the same hour. Ethan closed his eyes. Emily's voice came back to him. Maybe you're afraid of what happens when you stop controlling everything. He opened his eyes. Ridiculous, he whispered. He lay down. 10 minutes passed. 20. His heart remained restless. At 3:04 he got up. At 3:31 he walked into the kitchen. At 3:45 he stood beside the window. Sleep would not come. But something else was bothering him. The initials. TC. Ethan walked into his private study. He opened an old company archive. Years of documents were stored there. Contracts, legal records, acquisition files, and reports inherited from his father. He typed 2 letters into the search system. TC. Hundreds of documents appeared. Then one name stopped him. Thomas Carter. Ethan stared at the screen. The name triggered a memory he hadn't visited in decades. A younger version of his father, arguing with a mechanic. A man holding a clipboard. A warning about a vehicle. Then Ethan's memory blurred. He leaned closer to the screen. Thomas Carter had worked for Blackwood Industries 30 years ago. Not as an executive. Not as a wealthy businessman. He had been a maintenance specialist. And his employment file had ended abruptly 3 days before the accident that killed Claire. Ethan's breathing changed. He clicked the file. Most of the documents were missing. One sentence remained. Employee TRMINATD, internal security matter. Ethan stared at it. Why had he never known this? Before he could investigate further, his phone rang. Charles Bennett. Ethan answered. Charles? Ethan, it's nearly 4 a.m. I know. Why are you accessing the old employee archives? Ethan's eyes narrowed. How do you know what I'm accessing? Silence. Only for a second. But it was enough. Charles recovered quickly. The system notified me. Ethan said nothing. Then Charles asked quietly, Did you find something about Thomas Carter? Ethan froze. Charles had just answered a question Ethan hadn't asked. And suddenly the name of the poor waitress he'd met that night didn't feel like a coincidence anymore. Ethan said nothing for several seconds. On the other end of the phone, Charles Bennett waited. You mentioned Thomas Carter, Ethan finally said. I never told you I was looking at his file. Charles exhaled slowly. I assumed that was why you were calling. I didn't call you. Silence. This one lasted longer. Then Charles said, Ethan, you're exhausted. We can discuss this tomorrow. No. Ethan's voice became colder. Tell me who Thomas Carter was. You know who he was. I know his name. I want to know why his employee file was sealed. Charles hesitated. He was a maintenance contractor. Was he terminated? Performance issues. Stared at the screen. Then why does the file say internal security matter? Charles's voice changed. Your father handled it. My father died 18 years ago. I know. Then why are you still protecting his decisions? Charles didn't answer. Ethan ended the call. He remained in his study, staring at the old file. For 30 years, he had believed the accident that killed Claire was a tragic mechanical failure. The official report had said the brakes failed. His father had accepted the conclusion. Ethan had never questioned it. But now one fact wouldn't leave his mind. Thomas Carter had warned Blackwood Industries about something before the accident. 3 days later, he was gone. Ethan pulled another file from the archive, the original accident report. The first page was ordinary vehicle, location, time, mechanical failure. Then he noticed a handwritten notation at the bottom, inspection requested prior to departure. Ethan frowned. There was no accompanying inspection report. Someone had removed it. His phone rang again. Marcus. Sir, come upstairs. Later, Marcus entered the study. Ethan placed the documents in front of him. Tell me what you know about Thomas Carter. Marcus looked at the name. I've heard it before. Where? Old security records. Records? Marcus hesitated. Records relating to the night Claire died. Stood. What are you not telling me? Marcus looked uncomfortable. Some of the old files were transferred to a private archive after your father's death. Who authorized it? Marcus looked at the signature. Charles Bennett. The room became silent. Ethan sat down slowly. The same man who had just asked why he was investigating Thomas Carter had also been responsible for hiding the records. But before Ethan could process it, another thought surfaced. Emily, the initials, her father's name. The timing. He didn't believe in coincidences anymore. Across the city, Emily was lying awake in the bakery. She couldn't stop thinking about Ethan. Not because he was a billionaire, because he had looked lonely. She knew that kind of loneliness. Her father had experienced it after his reputation was destroyed. Years ago, Thomas had returned home carrying a box of personal belongings. Emily had been 15. "Dad, why aren't you working?" He had smiled. Good people lose. She hadn't understood then, now she did. Thomas had spent the final years of his life repairing small machines from home. He never explained why his old employer had abandoned him. But once, when Emily was 17, she had found him burning papers in the backyard. She had asked what they were. "Nothing you need to worry about." He had looked frightened. That memory had almost disappeared from her mind. Almost. Emily sat upright. She suddenly remembered something else. Before throwing the papers into the fire, her father had kept one document aside. He had placed it inside his old toolbox. The same toolbox beneath her bed. Emily reached for it. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened the lid. Beneath the tools was a folded piece of paper. She unfolded it. The ink had faded. At the top was the Blackwood Industries logo. And beneath it, one sentence: "Brake system requires immediate replacement before vehicle is operated." Emily stared at the date. It was the day before Claire Blackwood died. Her heart began pounding. She turned the page. At the bottom was her father's signature, Thomas Carter. Emily whispered, "Dad, what happened?" She didn't know that across the city, Ethan was asking exactly the same question. And neither knew that the answer would force them to confront a secret someone had spent 30 years killing to keep buried. Emily read the warning again. Then again. The paper shook between her fingers. Her father had inspected the Blackwood family vehicle the day before Claire died. He had written the warning himself. Yet the official accident report had described the brake failure as unexpected. Emily's first instinct was to call the police. Her second was to call Ethan. But then she remembered the way Charles Bennett had been mentioned in her father's old papers. One name appeared more than once. Charles Bennett. She had no idea why a billionaire's attorney was connected to her father's ruined career. But now the pieces were beginning to touch. Emily placed the document inside an envelope and slipped it into her coat. She needed answers before she trusted anyone, especially Ethan. Meanwhile, Ethan sat in his study with Marcus. The old accident report lay open between them. "Find the original mechanics report," Ethan said. Marcus nodded. "What if it was destroyed? Then find out who destroyed it." Marcus turned to leave. "Marcus." He stopped. "If Charles asks what we're doing." Ethan looked at the photograph of Claire. "Tell him nothing." The next morning, Ethan did something he hadn't done in years. He canceled 3 meetings. He ignored his investment committee. He even postponed a major acquisition worth hundreds of millions. His board was stunned. Ethan had always been predictable. Business came first. But now, something from the past had awakened. At noon, he returned to the diner. Emily was working. She saw him through the window. Her heart skipped, but she forced herself to remain calm. When Ethan entered, several customers recognized him. Whispers spread immediately. "That's Ethan Blackwood, the billionaire. Why is he here?" Emily approached him. "You came back. I have questions." "So do I." Ethan looked at her carefully. "About your father." Emily's face went still. "How do you know about my father?" "I found his name in my family's records." She stared at him. Then she slowly removed the envelope from her coat. "My father left this." Ethan opened it. His eyes landed on the warning. For 30 years, he had carried the image of Claire's final night in his mind. Now, for the first time, he was looking at evidence that the story he'd been told might have been false. "Where did you get this?" "My father's toolbox." "Did anyone else know about it?" "No." Ethan looked at her. "Emily, you need to be careful." "Why?" "Because if this document is authentic, someone lied about my sister's death." Emily's voice softened. "My father spent the last years of his life afraid." Ethan looked down. For the first time, he understood something he had never considered. While he had spent 30 years blaming himself for sleeping through the night Claire died, another family had spent 30 years living with the consequences of whatever had really happened. "What happened to your father?" he asked. "He lost his job, his reputation, everything." "Why?" "I don't know." Ethan looked at the paper again. "I think someone wanted him silent." Emily's eyes met his. "Then we're looking for the same person." Neither noticed Charles Bennett standing outside the diner. He had followed Ethan. Through the glass, he watched Ethan and Emily talking. Then his gaze settled on the document in Ethan's hand. His face changed. He immediately pulled out his phone. "It's happening," he whispered. A voice answered. "Does Ethan know?" Charles watched Emily. "He has the report." There was a pause. "Then stop them." Charles ended the call. Inside, Ethan suddenly looked toward the window. Charles was gone. A strange feeling passed through him. Emily noticed. "What is it?" Ethan stood. "We need somewhere private." "Why?" "Because whoever buried this secret for 30 years may already know we found it." Emily's fingers tightened around her father's toolbox key. Neither of them knew that someone had just begun following her. And this time, the danger wasn't watching Ethan. It was watching her. Ethan led Emily through a private entrance behind the diner, where Marcus was waiting beside the SUV. Emily hesitated before getting inside. "You said somewhere private." "I meant my office." Her eyes widened. "Your office?" "Yes." "The billionaire CEO's office." Ethan almost smiled. "You knew who I was yesterday." "I knew your name, that's different." Marcus opened the door. Emily looked at the vehicle, then at Ethan. "I don't belong in your world." Ethan's expression softened. "Neither did I once." She climbed inside. As the SUV pulled away, Emily watched the diner disappear behind them. She had no idea that within hours, her photograph would be circulating across the internet, beside headlines claiming she had trapped the billionaire CEO. At Blackwood Tower, Ethan took Emily directly to his private office. The building rose 70 floors above the city, its lobby filled with marble, glass, and employees who immediately recognized their CEO. Whispers followed them. "That's her. The waitress. She was with him last night." Emily kept walking. She felt every stare. Ethan noticed. "Don't worry about them." "Easy for you to say." He looked at her. "You're right." That simple admission surprised her. Inside his office, Ethan locked the door. Marcus placed the accident report on the desk. Emily unfolded her father's warning. The two documents sat beside each other. The dates matched. The vehicle matched. But one detail didn't. The official report said no warning had been received before the crash. Thomas Carter's document proved otherwise. Ethan's breathing became heavier. "I spent 30 years believing my sister died, because nobody could have predicted the brake failure." Emily whispered, "Someone did predict it." Ethan looked at her. And somebody ignored him. The realization struck harder than either expected. Ethan closed his eyes. A flashback came. His father standing in the garage 30 years earlier. A mechanic arguing. Richard saying, "We don't have time." The young Ethan had been upstairs. Claire had been waiting for him. The memory vanished before he could see the mechanic's face. Ethan opened his eyes. Thomas wasn't just fired. Emily shook her head. "My father was afraid." Marcus stepped forward. "Sir, there's something else." He placed another document on the desk. A termination order. Signed by Charles Bennett. Emily's face went pale. "Charles?" Ethan stared at the signature. "Charles handled my father's legal affairs." But why would your father's lawyer fire him? Emily asked. He wasn't his lawyer then. Ethan looked at the date. Charles had been working inside Blackwood Industries, even before becoming the family attorney. The implication was disturbing. Then Ethan noticed a second signature. Victor Blackwood, his father's younger brother. Ethan's uncle. Victor had spent years claiming he had nothing to do with company operations during that period. Yet his signature was on the termination order. Victor was there, Ethan whispered. Marcus looked at him. Your uncle? Ethan nodded. 3 days before Claire died. Emily felt a chill. Then why would they both want your father silent? Ethan didn't answer. Because a darker possibility was forming. Maybe Claire hadn't been the intended victim. Maybe the accident had been meant for someone else. Before Ethan could speak, his office door handle moved. Marcus immediately reached for his weapon. The handle stopped. A voice came from outside. Ethan opened the door. Charles. Ethan looked at Emily. Stay here. Charles entered when Marcus unlocked the door. His face was calm. Too calm. I've been looking everywhere for you, Charles said. Ethan didn't move. You knew about Thomas Carter. Charles looked at Emily. Then at the document. His expression changed for the briefest moment. I know many things about this family. You lied to me. Charles sighed. You're tired. You're letting old grief cloud your judgment. Ethan stepped closer. My sister died because of those breaks. Charles's voice became quiet. Your sister died because sometimes terrible things happen. Emily suddenly spoke. No. Charles looked at her. Excuse me. My father wrote that warning before the accident. Charles's eyes hardened. For 1 second, the polished attorney disappeared. Emily saw fear. Real fear. Then he smiled. You should be careful accusing powerful people. Ethan stepped between them. Leave. Charles stared at him. You don't understand what you're reopening. Ethan's eyes narrowed. Then tell me. Charles said nothing. He simply walked toward the door. Before leaving, he looked at Emily. Not Ethan. Emily. And in that look was a warning. After the door closed, Emily whispered. He was afraid. Ethan nodded. Of the document? No. Emily shook her head. Of me. Neither realized how important that distinction would become. Charles Bennett's footsteps disappeared down the hallway, but the silence he left behind seemed heavier than before. Emily remained still. Ethan watched the closed door. Marcus broke the silence. We need to move you somewhere secure. Emily shook her head. No. Ethan turned. Emily, I came here because I wanted answers. I'm not going to hide now. You don't understand what you're dealing with. Neither do you. Ethan stared at her. She pointed at the documents. You've spent 30 years believing your sister's death was an accident. My father spent 30 years being destroyed because he tried to warn someone. Maybe both families were victims. The words struck him. Ethan looked away. For the first time, he allowed himself to imagine a possibility he had spent decades refusing to consider. Maybe Claire's death had never been his fault. Maybe he had built his entire life around a lie. His phone rang. Dr. Reeves. Ethan almost ignored it. Then he answered. Daniel. I've been reviewing your sleep data from last night. Ethan frowned. What about it? You slept. Ethan froze. Daniel continued. 3 hours and 42 minutes. Emily looked at him. Ethan's voice became quiet. I know. No medication. None. Alcohol. No. Daniel paused. Ethan, what changed? Ethan looked at Emily. Nothing. Emily raised an eyebrow. He corrected himself. Someone was with me. Daniel understood immediately. The woman. Ethan didn't answer. Daniel lowered his voice. Whatever happened last night, don't dismiss it. Your stress markers dropped dramatically. Ethan ended the call. Emily stared at him. You slept for 3 hours. 3 hours and 42 minutes. That doesn't sound like much. For me, it's extraordinary. She smiled faintly. Then maybe you should be proud. Ethan looked at her. I don't know how to be proud of sleeping. Then learn. The simplicity of her answer stayed with him. Later that evening, Ethan drove Emily back toward the bakery. Neither spoke much. But the silence between them no longer felt uncomfortable. When they arrived, Emily noticed a black car parked across the street. She stopped. Ethan noticed too. Do you know that vehicle? No. Marcus appeared behind them. Sir. The car pulled away immediately. Marcus watched it disappear. We should not leave her here. Emily folded her arms. Where am I supposed to go? Ethan looked at her. My guest house. No. Emily. I said no. I can give you a room without asking anything from you. I know. Then why refuse? She looked directly at him. Because I've spent too long surviving on my own to suddenly become someone's charity case. Ethan understood. So instead of arguing, he said, Then let me make you an offer. What offer? Work for my foundation. She laughed softly. You barely know me. I know you can read people. I work in a diner. You noticed something in me 3 minutes after meeting me that 6 doctors missed. Her smile disappeared. Ethan continued. You also found a document everyone else failed to find. Emily looked down. And what would I do? Help investigate the Carter case. She hesitated. It was exactly what she wanted. But accepting meant stepping directly into Ethan Blackwood's dangerous world. Fine, she said. Ethan nodded. Then we have a deal. Emily turned toward the bakery. Good night. Emily. She looked back. Thank you. For what? For sleeping. She smiled. I didn't make you sleep. No. Ethan's voice softened. You made me feel like I could. Emily went inside. Ethan watched until the door closed. That night, he returned home. For the first time in 30 years, he wasn't afraid of his bedroom. He changed clothes, turned off the lights, and lay down. The clock reached 2:17. His chest tightened. He heard Claire's voice in his memory. Don't sleep too long. Ethan opened his eyes. Then he remembered Emily. You don't have to control everything. His breathing slowed. He closed his eyes. But just as sleep began to take him, his phone vibrated. A message appeared. Unknown number. Stop digging into Claire Blackwood's death. Ethan sat upright. Another message arrived. The next person who gets hurt won't be someone you can save. Ethan stared at the screen. Then came a photograph. Emily, standing outside the bakery. Taken only minutes earlier. Ethan's blood ran cold. For 30 years, fear had kept him awake. Now, for the first time, he had something far more powerful than fear. Someone he could not bear to lose. Ethan stared at the photograph of Emily outside the bakery. His first instinct was to call her. His second was to send security. But he stopped. If someone was watching his phone, either move could expose her. He called Marcus instead. Get 2 people to the bakery, quietly. Don't let Emily know unless there's an immediate threat. Understood. And Marcus. Yes. Find out who sent that message. The line went silent. Ethan placed the phone down. For 30 years, He had survived by assuming the worst. Now his greatest fear had a face. Across the city, Emily was unaware of the danger approaching her. She was sitting at the bakery table, studying her father's documents. Beside the break warning was another piece of paper she had found hidden beneath the toolbox. It was a receipt from a private storage facility, dated 2 days after Claire's death. Thomas had rented a storage unit. Why? Emily read the address. Then she noticed something handwritten in the corner. If anything happens to me, look beneath the old Miller Bridge. Her heart began pounding. Before she could process it, her phone rang. Ethan. She answered. Hello. Emily, where are you? At the bakery. Stay inside. She frowned. Why? I'll explain when I get there. Ethan, what's happening? He hesitated. Someone is watching you. Emily looked toward the window. Across the street, a man stood beside a parked car. Then he turned away. Her stomach tightened. I think you're right. Lock the door. She did. Minutes later, Marcus arrived with security. But Ethan didn't. He had been stopped at Blackwood Tower. Charles Bennett was waiting in his office. I know what you're doing, Charles said. Ethan closed the door. Then you know I'm looking for the truth. You're destroying yourself. Why are you afraid of Thomas Carter? Charles's expression hardened. Because some truths should stay buried. Ethan stepped closer. Did you kill my sister? Charles looked genuinely shocked. No. The answer came too quickly. Ethan noticed. Charles continued. Your uncle Victor was involved in things you never understood. Then tell me. I can't. Why? Charles looked at him. Because if I tell you, people will die. Ethan's phone buzzed. A message from Marcus. Emily is safe. Relief passed through him. Then another message arrived. But she has disappeared. Ethan's blood ran cold. He called immediately. Marcus answered. She left through the back door 10 minutes ago. Why? We don't know. Ethan turned toward Charles. You did this. Charles shook his head. I didn't. Then Ethan's phone received a photograph. Emily was sitting inside a car. Beside her was a man Ethan recognized. Victor Blackwood. His uncle. A message appeared beneath the photograph. She knows where the evidence is. Ethan's face went pale. Charles whispered, Now you understand why I told you to stop. But Ethan wasn't listening. Because something about the photograph bothered him. Emily didn't look frightened. She looked determined. And in her hand was her father's old toolbox key. Ethan suddenly understood. She hadn't been kidnapped. She had gone looking for the final piece of the truth herself. But why would Victor want her alive? And what exactly had Thomas Carter hidden beneath Miller Bridge 30 years ago? Ethan reached Miller Bridge before sunrise. Marcus was beside him, 2 security officers behind them. The old bridge had been abandoned for years, its concrete supports scarred by time and neglect. Beneath it, Victor Blackwood stood beside Emily. Ethan stopped. Let her go. Victor smiled. Still protecting everyone, Ethan. Emily turned. I wasn't kidnapped. Ethan looked at her. I know. Victor laughed softly. She came here because her father left her a message. Clever girl. Emily held up the toolbox key. My father hid something here. Victor's smile disappeared. Ethan stepped forward. What happened 30 years ago? Victor stared at him. Then the old man's face changed. For the first time, Ethan saw something he had never seen in his uncle before. Fear. Your father was going to sell the company, Victor said. I couldn't let him. Ethan's voice hardened. So you sabotaged his car. I sabotaged the brakes because I needed to stop him from leaving town. Emily whispered, but Claire was in the car. Victor looked away. I didn't know she would be. The words hit Ethan like a physical blow. For 30 years, he had blamed himself. For 30 years, he had believed his failure to wake that night had cost Claire her life. But the truth had never been his. Victor continued. Your father survived the crash. He could have exposed me. Charles helped me bury the evidence. Ethan looked toward Charles, who had arrived moments earlier with police behind him. Charles lowered his head. I was 29, he said quietly. I was afraid. Victor threatened my family. Victor turned sharply. You don't get to blame me for everything. You destroyed my father, Emily said. Victor looked at her. Your father found the break report. Emily's eyes filled with tears. He tried to expose you. Yes. And you ruined him. Victor said nothing. That silence was answer enough. Marcus stepped forward and placed the recovered evidence on the hood of a vehicle. Thomas's original inspection report. The storage receipt. A recording recovered from the hidden compartment beneath Miller Bridge. The truth was finally complete. Victor was arrested. Charles surrendered and agreed to testify. The decades-old conspiracy became public. For Ethan, however, the greatest moment came later. He stood at Claire's grave with Emily beside him. The morning sun touched the flowers. Ethan held Claire's old birthday card. I thought I killed you, he whispered. Emily said nothing. He continued. For 30 years, I thought sleeping that night was the worst thing I had ever done. His voice broke. But I was 22. I was a boy who couldn't have known what was coming. He placed the card beside the grave. I forgive myself. It was the first time he had ever said those words. Months passed. Ethan's company survived the scandal. He established the Claire Blackwood Foundation for families devastated by workplace accidents and financial hardship. Emily became involved in the foundation, not because Ethan bought her a place in his world, but because she had earned it. She still refused expensive gifts. He still teased her about it. One evening, Ethan brought her to the same small bakery where everything had begun. He stood beside the old sofa where he had slept that impossible night. Emily looked around. You're quiet. I was thinking. Dangerous. He smiled. Then he took her hand. I spent 30 years believing sleep was the enemy. Emily looked at him. What changed? You. She shook her head. No, you changed. Ethan nodded. You're right. Then he took a small ring from his pocket. Emily stared at it. Ethan, I am not asking you to marry me because you made me sleep. She looked into his eyes. I know. I want to marry you because when I'm awake, you're the person I want beside me. Tears filled her eyes. But I'm still poor. Ethan smiled. I know. I don't want you to rescue me. I won't. I want to keep working. You will. I want to keep my father's toolbox. Obviously. She laughed through her tears. Then she said yes. Their wedding was small. No celebrity guests. No extravagant performance. Just family, close friends, and the people who had watched their impossible story unfold. That night, Ethan and Emily lay beside each other. The clock approached 2:17 a.m. Ethan opened his eyes. For 30 years, that number had represented the moment his peace disappeared. Emily felt his hand tighten. You're here, she whispered. Ethan looked at her. So are you. He closed his eyes. This time, there was no panic. No memory dragging him backward. No fear that someone would disappear while he slept. His breathing slowed. And Ethan Blackwood, the billionaire CEO who had not slept peacefully in 30 years, finally surrendered to the night. When morning came, Emily woke first. She looked at him. He was still asleep. Peaceful. Untroubled. She smiled. Ethan opened his eyes few minutes later. How long? Emily glanced at the clock. 8 hours. He stared at her. Then he laughed. Not the controlled laugh of a billionaire in a boardroom. A real laugh. The kind Claire had once heard when he was young. Emily reached for his hand. Ethan squeezed it. For 30 years, he had believed he needed billions to protect himself from loss. But the woman who owned almost nothing had given him something money never could. Peace. And that was why the billionaire CEO didn't just sleep beside the poor girl. He married her. Not because she rescued him. Not because she was poor. Not because she possessed some magical cure. He married her because, after 30 years of living in fear, she was the first person who taught him that love did not require him to remain awake forever. And for the first time since Claire's death, Ethan Blackwood finally slept without being afraid of tomorrow.